Hello, this is Mr. Kessler, and welcome to Solving Quadratic Equations by Factoring. Our objective in this video is to solve quadratic equations by factoring. So, just to be reminded that most quadratic equations have two solutions. The solutions to the quadratic equation are also known as the zeros, the roots, and the x-intercepts. And in this case, the x-intercept is right here at -2 and +2. So the zeros, the roots, the x-intercepts, the solutions are 2 and -2. So to solve quadratic equations by factoring, we've got to be reminded of this property, the multiplicative property of 0. If the product is equal to 0, then one of the factors must be equal to 0. So in this case, x times y equals 0. What must be true about either x or y? Well, either x has to be equal to 0 or y has to be equal to 0. So if that makes sense, plug in 0 for x. You get 0 as your product. Substitute 0 in for y in the equation. You're going to get 0 as your product. Now, in the next example, a times the quantity b plus 3, what must be true about either a or the quantity b plus 3? Well, either a has to be equal to 0, or the other factor has to be equal to 0. To figure out what b needs to be, we got to solve for b. So either a is 0 or b is -3, and that will make that equation true. So using that property, the multiplicative property of 0, why don't you solve for number 1 and number 2? Go ahead, pause the video, and give it a shot. Okay, the solutions. In the first example, x equals -1, x equals 5. We set both binomials equal to 0 and then solve for the variable. To check to see if you did it right, substitute -1 in for x. Oop. -1 does work. How about 5? Yes, both solutions work. And as is the case in number 2, n equals 2/7 and n equals 4/5. Either one of those will give you a product of 0. Wow. Look how much younger I am. Look at that hairline. Look at that dark hair. It happens. Y equals x squared plus 6x plus 5. So to solve a quadratic equation by factoring, you first got to set it equal to 0. Why does it have to be equal to 0? Remember we talked about that the zeros of the function, the roots of the function, or the x-intercepts are your solutions. And what is y equal to when you're intersecting the x-axis? Y is equal to 0. So that's why we set it equal to 0. So first step, set quadratic equal to 0. Second step, factor into binomials. Then third step, set each binomial equal to 0. And finally, fourth step, solve for the variable. So in this example up here, our first step is going to be set the quadratic equal to 0. We do that by adding 15 to both sides. Next step is to factor. Next step is to set each binomial equal to 0. And finally, solve for the variable. So as you can see in both examples, -5 squared is 25, minus 40 equals -15. In -3, substitute that in for x. -3 squared is 9, minus 24 is also -15. Now it's your turn. You do it. Pause the video and see if you can solve this quadratic equation by factoring. Okay. Solutions. end up being x equals -1/2 and x equals -3. Notice I added 3 to both sides to set it equal to 0. Then I factored. I used the box to help me organize my thoughts. And then finally, set each binomial equal to 0 and then solve for the variable. Now it's your chance to show me what you know. Coughing. Complete the 9.2 quick check on Google Classroom. To complete the quick check, you got to get a perfect score. You can do it as many times as necessary to get that perfect score. Any questions, shoot me a post or an email.